Hi everyone, it's Don and I hope you're having a fantastic day. Well, the CDC just changed more COVID protocols and it could really affect some of the cruises. So we've been living with the CDC's recommendations. Remember, the cruise lines all volunteered to follow the CDC's recommendations and the guidelines. Now they no longer have to report a lot of their stuff and things like that. We're not being checked on a regular basis, but they still have to answer the CDC if something happens on their cruise ships. They're still under control. However, the CDC has now relaxed some of the COVID protocols out there, and it could mean some big changes. For instance, they are now saying that you no longer have to social distance, which means you no longer have to try and stay 6 feet apart in a crowded situation. Now, this protocol has been in place for over 2 years now, which is a good thing that they're saying that if you don't have to social distance anymore, I guess things are starting to get really back to our new normal, shall we say. So that means also on cruise ships, they don't have to keep the front rows empty in the theater anymore for social distancing. They don't have to put down spots down for every second seat for people to sit because you're social distancing in. They don't have to block anything off anymore. They don't have to block off areas in the dining so you're social distances. This is all good things for cruise lines, and yes, believe it or not, some cruise ships still out there, we're not allowing you to sit in the front row. We're not allowing you to do a lot of things. So yeah, that's a good one. The social distancing aspect is a good one if you're a cruiser. And then we also have more guidelines saying that, you know what? We should no longer quarantine close contacts or people who have been exposed unless they test positive and show that they have an infection. Which means, I believe at one point on the cruises, it was 80%. Sorry, that's more than that. It was for every one person, 4 people were close contacts that would have to quarantine, which meant they were quarantining, 5 people instead of 1 person. And now if you don't have to unless you test positive, that's a good thing. You're no longer going to get that tap on the door and say, oh, by the way, that person you had dinner with yesterday means you have to quarantine for 5 days or 14 days at one point, which we'll get to again in a little bit later. So wow, that's also a big change because a lot of people had to quarantine for the simple fact that somebody at their dinner, at a show they were at, or they just sat down and talked to during a game show for an hour meant they had to social distance and quarantine for the rest of their cruise, which unless and they felt fine and they didn't test positive. They did not have COVID, but they ruined their holidays because of that rule that was out there. And that rule now has been relaxed by the CDC. Again, a good thumbs up move as far as I'm concerned for people going on a cruise. You only will need to isolate if you actually test positive now. Yes, that's a good thing, I think. There is a couple more things that I'll get into, but before I get there, let me just invite you to hit that subscribe button if you haven't done so already. If you want to keep up to date with all things cruising, from cruise vlogs to new ships to the cruise news to the protocols that are changing almost, it seems, on a daily basis lately per cruise line. One cruise line announces something, another one announces something an hour later, another one announces something today, and they're all different. They're all different from each other. So if you want to keep up to date with that, maybe hit that subscribe button. It doesn't cost a thing. Join the community here on YouTube and keep up to date so you're best prepared when you're ready to cruise again and again. I'd really do appreciate it. Thanks to everyone who's subscribed so far. Okay, they also come out and said that you should no longer contact trace people except for high-risk settings like hospitals or senior citizen residences. So you should not contact trace people who have gone to a restaurant, or have gone out to a nightclub, or gone to a concert, or gone on a cruise ship? How many people had been notified in the past saying that, hey, you were a close contact to someone on the cruise you just got off of, you better go and get tested, and you have this many days to go get tested. People here in Canada received that. I received that. Didn't have it at the time. No issues. Tested negative. So that's a resource that a lot of hospitals had to use, and the medical teams with the governments had to use up resources. They had to have people doing that and making those calls and doing the tracing. Now they can free that up for other more important work for people who actually got sick from COVID and had really bad issues. And that's where they say the CDC is now saying that they should be concentrating on not the normal everyday routine that people are going through, but only those people who came down with severe illness from COVID during it. People who were in high risk, people who had high infection that caused respiratory issues and things like that. That's where all the resources should be put now. And I completely agree. I had the sniffles for 3 days, and that was my entire effect. And I'm a high risk person with my cancer treatments and COVID, my immune system, etc. And it didn't strike me. So I don't think anyone should be spending any time and resources making sure I'm okay when I didn't have any ill effects. It should always go to people who did come down and had some severe illness from it. Now, they did leave some encouragements out there. They still encourage you, if you're showing symptoms, to test. And if you test positive, to isolate yourself for 5 days. And they did say wear a mask for 10 days when you're out in public. So after your 5 days of isolation, you have to go to work, wear that mask just for 10 days for extra protection for those people around you. Not for yourself, because you've already had it, obviously. But yeah, that's a reasonable request, right? If you have symptoms of COVID, you should test just in case. You don't want to be that person who does infect somebody who does have a respiratory issue and things like that. And that person should also be taking their own precautions as well. If you know you're susceptible and have had past COVID issues, then you should be wearing a mask in public and things like that as well. Not just the person who may have it as well. I kind of agree with pretty much all of these CDC recommendations, which I haven't said in a long time. But yeah, they seem to be going in the right direction, getting the country back to normal. Everyone should be allowed to go places. You should be taking your own precautions. Double check if you do have symptoms, and you don't have to isolate. You don't have to quarantine. If you just happen to brush by somebody who happened to have COVID, or have dinner with somebody who did come down with COVID, if you don't test positive, you shouldn't have to isolate and quarantine. And that's a big one for the cruise lines, because they were forced to quarantine people who were just close contacts. That's going to free up even more cabins on ships too, by the way, and make that quarantine halls much smaller. You hear all these stories about 100 cabins, people isolated for COVID. Yeah, well, not all of them have COVID necessarily. Some of them may have just been close contacts. Well, I hope you appreciate this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. Want to see more tips, more tricks, more travel blogs from around the world? Hit that subscribe button. Until next time, have yourself a safe and a great vacation.